Usually when you look at a map, you just trust that the cartographer drew what was actually there, like the mountains, the rivers, the borders.
But you just assume it's this perfectly objective reflection of reality.
Exactly. But what if the person drawing that map intentionally left off an entire continent just so you wouldn't go looking for it?
Or, what if they exaggerated a tiny island into this massive threat just to keep your eyes fixed right there?
Yeah, exactly. Because the stakes for how that map is drawn, they dictate entirely where a society decides to build its roads or, deploy its resources.
Which is exactly what we're looking at today.
Right. So today we are doing a deep dive into how Google is drawing that map. We've got this recent Tech Policy Press article by Gregory Gondwe, and he breaks down Google's new white paper. It's called A Pragmatic Approach to AI Governance in America.
It's a really fascinating piece of source material.
It is. And our mission today is to explore that intersection of AI governance and corporate strategy. We're basically looking at this high-stakes chess match happening right now to define what even counts as an AI problem in the first place.
Yeah, and it's a document that, on the surface, it sounds incredibly measured. Like, Google is really trying to position itself in the sensible middle here.
Right, playing the peacemaker.
Exactly. They are actively rejecting the unregulated, Wild West approach to tech, but they are simultaneously pushing back against an overly restrictive regulatory environment.
Because they argue that might stifle American innovation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But what we are really analyzing here is the profound power of classification. By dividing AI harms into these specific, distinct categories, a massive corporation can quietly shape the governance priorities of an entire nation.
I mean, they aren't just recommending rules at that point. They are defining the boundaries of the debate. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's look at the specific categorization tactic they are using. Because Google's document essentially splits AI into two totally distinct camps.
Right. The map gets divided.
Yeah. On one side, you have what they call frontier AI.
And these are the exceptional, potentially dangerous models. We're talking about systems capable of launching sophisticated cyber attacks or, assisting in dangerous biological research.
Of really heavy stuff.
Yeah, national security level threats, the kind of things that sound like they belong in a blockbuster movie.
Right, it's very sci-fi. And then on the other side, you have what they call everyday AI. And this is the stuff you and I interact with constantly.
Routine stuff.
Exactly. Automated decision tools, resume scanners, routine systems just running in the background of our apps. And looking at this division, it really feels like a classic magician's misdirection.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, because they are pointing this giant blazing spotlight at the sci-fi threats. Like, oh no, a model helping create a bioweapon, which obviously that is terrifying.
So our attention is completely hijacked by the spectacular.
Yes. But while we're staring at the spotlight, we're entirely ignoring the mundane sleight of hand happening in our everyday lives with this routine AI.
What's fascinating here is how this division actually dictates the regulatory response. Google's argument is that frontier AI is so exceptional and so new that it deserves a brand new regulatory institution to oversee it.
But the everyday AI is just, what, fine as is?
Pretty much. They frame everyday AI as familiar. They argue it's familiar enough to just fall under the legal and regulatory systems that already exist.
Wow. So whoever draws this map of harms gets to decide where lawmakers focus all their time, funding, and, legal firepower.
Exactly. It completely shifts the institutional focus.
It makes you wonder about your own priorities, honestly. Like, if you're listening to this, are you more worried about a theoretical AI launching a cyber attack on a government server? Or, I don't know, an algorithmic software quietly deciding whether you get a job interview next week?
Right, because both of those matter, absolutely. But one is happening to millions of people right now, today.
Yeah. But because Google isolates frontier AI as this special category, it gives them the excuse to propose a tailor-made solution.
And that solution is a new federal body they're pitching. They call it FARO.
FARO, the Frontier AI Regulatory Organization.
That's the one. And according to the white paper, FARO would be funded by the industry, supervised by a federal agency, and governed by a mix of independent and industry representatives.
Okay, wait.
Its job would be to set safety standards, conduct audits.
I have to jump in here, sorry. An industry-funded regulator. where the regulated companies provide the primary knowledge base and actually sit on the governing board.
Yes, that is the proposal.
Isn't that just like letting the players referee their own playoff game and like write the rule book during halftime?
It's entirely valid to look at that structure and see the immediate potential for regulatory capture. I mean,
Yeah.
the fox is guarding the henhouse. But regulators do face a very real practical dilemma here. You cannot oversee technology that you do not technically understand. You absolutely need technical experts in the room to audit these systems. And right now, the vast majority of those experts are employed by the tech companies.
Well, yeah, they pay the most.
Exactly. Google explicitly points out that FARO would need to pay highly competitive salaries just to attract the right technical specialists away from the private sector.
So the government gets the technical expertise, but the independence is completely compromised by a revolving door.
That's the risk, yes.
I mean, if I am an auditor at FARO and I know my next seven-figure job offer needs to come from Google or DeepMind, I'm probably not going to audit their upcoming language model too aggressively, right?
Yeah, and that is the exact mechanical failure of the revolving door. Independence cannot simply be assumed just because someone temporarily has a government title. It has to be rigorously structurally protected.
And are there structural protections in this proposal?
Well, our source highlights a pretty chilling detail from Google's proposal that exposes this vulnerability. Google states that FARO should balance safety with innovation and, quote, speed to market in a global race.
Wait, speed to market, that is being pitched as a regulatory goal.
Yes. And if speed becomes a formalized national priority, embedded right into the regulator's mandate, then caution gets framed as a threat to U.S. competitiveness.
Oh, wow. So suddenly, a corporation's private product release schedule quietly becomes part of the national interest.
Exactly. A true regulator should inherently have the power to halt or delay a system indefinitely if the safety evidence is incomplete. But if they are legally mandated to prioritize the global race, their teeth are effectively pulled before they even begin.
That is wild. The source also mentions that Google supports giving the federal government early access to these advanced models, right?
Yes, which actually aligns with the current administration's executive order on AI innovation and security.
Which, I mean, sounds great for national preparedness. But mechanistically, it locks these massive tech companies and national security institutions into this very tight, mutually beneficial embrace.
It cements the tech giant's position at the absolute center of geopolitical power.
And if you establish this massive, well-funded institution for frontier AI, it creates a vacuum effect.
How do you mean?
Like all the federal resources, the top legal minds, the technical auditors, they all get sucked into FARO to look for bioweapons. That mathematically leaves almost nothing left to oversee the other side of the map.
The everyday AI.
Right. And Google claims that existing consumer, employment, privacy, and copyright laws are perfectly fine to handle routine AI.
But Gondwe argues that this assumption fundamentally misunderstands how AI harms actually work in the real world.
Yeah, exactly.
Google's premise rests on the idea that fraud or discrimination don't suddenly become legal just because an AI is doing it, which technically is true.
Right, fraud is still fraud.
But the reality of how everyday AI exerts power is that it rarely looks like one clear, distinct legal violation that fits neatly into some 20th century statute.
Right.
The harm is gradual. It is cumulative.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Relying on existing laws to govern AI is kind of like trying to sue a cloud for raining on you.
Oh, I like the visualization of
Yeah.
that. Break down the mechanics of why the legal system struggles with it.
Okay, so our existing legal system is highly specific and very linear. To win a lawsuit, you generally need a specific act that broke the law, a clearly injured person, and a specific responsible institution you can point a finger at.
Right, a clear cause and effect.
But AI harm is completely distributed across this massive tech stack. Think about how modern software is built. It's a huge web of connections. Say a local company buys an AI screening tool from a vendor.
Okay.
That vendor built their tool by plugging into a third-party API.
And an API, or application programming interface, is essentially just a software bridge allowing two distinct programs to talk to each other and share data.
Exactly. So the vendor's API is pulling data from a massive foundational model built by a tech giant like Google. If that screening tool suddenly starts filtering out job applicants based on, say, flawed demographic inferences, who do you sue?
The local company didn't write the code.
Right. And the vendor just used an API. And the tech giant. They say they merely provide the base model and aren't responsible for downstream applications.
So the legal responsibility just vanishes into the software architecture.
Exactly. The chain of causality is incredibly murky, which makes those existing laws Google points to almost impossible to actually enforce.
The source gives a really great example of a local newsroom dealing with this. So search engines and chatbots start summarizing the newsroom's original reporting.
Which we see happening all the time now.
Right. And then the newsroom's website traffic drops, advertising income dries up, and they eventually face bankruptcy.
But the AI didn't copy one specific article word for word in a way that cleanly triggers a traditional copyright lawsuit, right?
Exactly. It just absorbed the value of the journalism over millions of micro-interactions.
Or think about the workplace. Human resources managers are using automated algorithms to rank job applicants, assign shift work, monitor employee keystrokes, and even flag people for dismissal.
And each of those individual algorithmic decisions might seem small or, statistically justifiable to an auditor looking at a spreadsheet.
Yeah, but a worker might experience exclusion or get passed over for a promotion without ever being able to point to one single decision that clearly violated a specific employment law.
But taken together, over time, these systems fundamentally change who holds power in the workplace.
Absolutely.
And this raises an important question regarding copyright and the illusion of choice in governance. Google argues that training their AI on publicly available material qualifies as fair use.
But they do offer an opt-out, don't they?
Yes, they say they support tools that allow website owners and creators to opt out of having their work scraped. They frame this opt-out mechanism as empowering creators with a choice.
But Gondwe completely dismantles this idea of choice because it just ignores the structural reality of the internet.
Because in practice, exercising an opt-out choice requires technical knowledge, constant vigilance, and frankly, bargaining leverage.
Which most people don't have.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A massive media conglomerate has a building full of lawyers and engineers. They can identify when their data is being used and negotiate a lucrative licensing deal, what Google calls a value exchange.
But what about a freelance journalist or a local artist or like a small educational publisher in Africa?
They don't have the engineering resources to constantly monitor the internet to see
Yeah.
if their work was swept into some massive training data set.
They often don't even know it happened until their work's value has already been absorbed and commercialized by the model.
Exactly. The opt-out system offers a formal technical choice, but it heavily leverages a massive power imbalance. By default, the stronger party collects the value.
And the weaker party is burdened with this incredibly expensive, time-consuming task of discovering the theft, proving it, and then somehow navigating the tech company's labyrinthine opt-out procedures.
It's a structural harm masquerading as a technical feature.
That is so well said. And speaking of structural footprint, Google's governance strategy isn't just limited to code and copyright. It extends heavily into physical infrastructure.
Because AI requires massive, sprawling data centers.
Right, and those data centers require mind-boggling amounts of electricity, water for cooling servers, and physical land.
And Google's framing of this resource consumption is, well, it's brilliant from a strategic standpoint. In their white paper, they compare expanding the U.S. electricity grid to power AI to the building of the Eisenhower-era interstate highway system.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They are pitching the infrastructure for their private commercial product as this shared patriotic national investment.
I mean, I noticed they point to a few specific policies to try and calm fears about everyday citizens footing the bill for this. They mentioned the previous administration's ratepayer protection pledge and Google's own capacity commitment framework.
Right.
But how do those actually work? Because it really feels like they are intentionally blurring the lines between public good and private profit margins here.
Let's look at the mechanics of those promises. The Ratepayer Protection Pledge is essentially a political commitment meant to assure everyday households that their utility bills won't spike just to fund industrial energy expansion.
Okay, and Google's framework.
Google's Capacity Commitment Framework is their internal mechanism where they promise to sign long-term, guaranteed contracts for power. The theory is that if Google guarantees they will buy the power for 10 years, the local utility isn't taking on financial risk to build a new substation for the data center.
But that ignores the broader physics of the electrical grid, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, even if Google pays for their specific substation, adding that much massive continuous demand to a local grid requires systemic upgrades miles down the line. We're talking new transmission wires, entirely new power plants.
And you're hitting on the exact critique raised in the source. Utilities routinely sold the costs of those systemic grid-wide upgrades into the base rates charged to every single household in the region.
So the frameworks look great on a slide deck, but the actual mechanics of utility billing mean the local community often ends up subsidizing the tech giant's expansion anyway.
Precisely. The realities of AI infrastructure are hyper-local. The depletion of the local water table, the strain on local utilities, the noise pollution that falls heavily on specific towns.
So the core governance question Gondwe poses is, who gets to define what counts as a public benefit?
Right. And who is independently measuring those local costs?
It certainly shouldn't just be the companies who desperately need the infrastructure making those calculations.
Exactly. So we have looked at how this map is being drawn domestically, how they are categorizing the tech, the laws, the physical infrastructure.
But there's a global aspect to this too, right?
Yes, the true scale of Google's strategy reveals itself when it crosses international borders. Google introduces a concept in their paper called regulatory reciprocity.
Regulatory reciprocity. So basically, if Google gets the FARO stamp of approval here in Washington, they want a free pass to deploy those models in Paris, Tokyo, and Nairobi without facing local regulatory hurdles.
That is the exact mechanism. They suggest that other countries shouldn't bother setting up their own complex, expensive AI evaluation processes.
Oh, I bet they do.
Right. Instead, they could just legally recognize and accept the AI models that have already been audited and approved by FARO in the United States.
I mean, I can see the sales pitch for a developing nation. If a country doesn't have a massive federal budget to hire technical AI specialists, just piggybacking on the U.S. standard saves a ton of money and bureaucratic friction.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
But if we connect this to the bigger picture, it is incredibly dangerous for global sovereignty.
Because they're adopting more than just the tech.
Exactly. Because if a country just adopts the U.S. standard, they are fundamentally exporting American assumptions, American corporate priorities, and American blind spots into their own societies.
And remember what FARO is laser focused on: frontier national security threats, cyber attacks, and bioweapons.
Right. But a country in Africa, Latin America, or Asia is going to have completely different urgent priorities.
Yeah, bioweapon might not be their primary concern right now.
They might be dealing with foundational AI models trained primarily on Western data that completely fail to understand local languages or cultural contexts.
Which can completely ruin public services if it gets integrated into government systems.
Or they might be deeply concerned about the uncompensated extraction of their indigenous knowledge into Western data sets. They might have fragile labor markets and need strict worker protections against the exact kind of automated management software that Google categorizes as harmless, everyday AI.
Wow. So if the only standard you enforce globally is the one that checks for bioweapons, all those everyday structural harms just get rubber stamped across the planet.
You are essentially outsourcing your digital sovereignty to an industry-funded board sitting in Washington, D.C.
That is a massive consequence.
It really is. International cooperation on AI is vital, of course. But cooperation shouldn't mean one superpower writes the rules and the rest of the world just downloads them.
Governments need the capability to evaluate AI against their own unique social conditions, languages, and legal frameworks.
Absolutely.
So we have completely deconstructed the flaws in Google's map. We see how the boundaries are drawn to protect their core business interests while, satisfying the government's national security desires.
The question is, how do we fix it?
Right. How does the source suggest we actually fix it? How do we redraw the boundaries for true democratic AI governance?
Well, the author is clear that we shouldn't just dismiss Google's proposal out of hand simply because it came from a corporation. I mean, they do possess real, necessary technical expertise. But if society is going to build an institution like FARO, it cannot be controlled by the industry it oversees. True democratic governance requires that a regulatory board has a mandatory public interest majority.
Meaning we cannot just have a sprinkle of independent voices amidst a sea of corporate representatives.
Exactly. And the funding mechanism has to change, too.
Because if FARO is industry funded, the tech companies can always implicitly threaten to pull funding or paralyze the budget if they don't like a regulatory ruling.
Exactly. The funding must be required by law and administered entirely independently.
What about the audits themselves?
Furthermore, the summaries of those AI audits must be made public. There can be narrow exceptions for genuine, verified security risks, sure, but companies cannot be allowed to hide algorithmic failures behind the veil of trade secrets when a product impacts millions of citizens.
And there must be strict, enforceable limits on that revolving door we talked about between tech companies and regulators.
Yes. My core takeaway from Gondwe's analysis is that critical thinking regarding strategy is absolutely essential here.
It really is.
We must utilize industry expertise to understand the mechanics of how AI works, but we cannot hand over control of the institutions and the very definitions of what constitutes a harm to the industry itself.
Because at the end of the day, you, listening to this, are the one actually experiencing the consequences of these strategic decisions.
You're the one interacting with the everyday AI.
Exactly. Whether you are a worker being subtly managed by an algorithm, a consumer dealing with a bias screening tool, or a creator having your work scraped without compensation.
That is why these everyday structural harms have to be brought from the edges of Google's map right into the center of the regulatory conversation.
It always comes back to who is holding the pen when the map is drawn. We have to make sure the cartographers aren't just drawing paths that lead straight to their own bank vaults.
That's the ultimate challenge of AI governance right now.
Which brings me to a final thought I want to leave you with. Just something to mull over regarding this idea of gradual, invisible governance. If AI harms are being aggressively categorized by lawmakers based on what is spectacularly dangerous versus what is familiarly mundane, what mundane piece of technology in your workplace or daily life right now is quietly rewriting the rules of your industry without you even realizing it?
It's a question we all need to be asking.
Thank you for listening to AI Governance, Strategy and the Future of Intelligent Organizations. Before you go, we'd love to hear your perspective. What stood out to you most in today's discussion? Do you agree with the conclusions or do you see the issue differently? Leave a comment and join the conversation. Your insights often inspire future episodes. If you found this episode valuable, follow the podcast for weekly conversations exploring AI governance, strategy, responsible AI, and the future of intelligent organizations. And if you know someone who would benefit from this discussion, please share the episode with them. Together, we're building a community that goes beyond the headlines to understand what AI really means for organizations and society.